Hello party people and welcome to Osaka, Japan, famous for its street food and nightlife. Normally this would be all lit up. These are neon signs back here, but at night I don't stream for y'all. Also, this is completely packed at night. We were here last night and it was an absolute zoo. I don't think I could have streamed for 30 seconds without people yelling and saying woohoo, because it's a fun place. Not that Japan is traditionally loud. It's a very quiet, even when it's really busy down here. It's quiet. People are very polite, but they were just taking pictures and talking to each other really quietly. So let's go take a look at your top voted questions from PollGab. Also be aware that it may rain. It's supposed to start raining at any minute in here. And I'm in an area where I'm not really protected by the rain, but and also I don't have a rain jacket with me, so live dangerously. First off, Craig asks, should you start all of your stored procedures with begin and end them with end? Okay, you should. This is actually something that's been bothering me for a while because I know there are a couple of first responder kit stored procedures where we didn't do that. Excuse me. But you should, and I'm going to tell you why. So I had a client, for example, once where they did a deployment of a stored procedure and it didn't have begin and end. And at the bottom of the script they deployed, there was a permissions change, grant permissions to so-and-so to execute this stored procedure. Well, that grant became part of the stored procedure. So every time the stored procedure ran, that grant ran too, which ended up causing them problems because they were running this stored procedure thousands of times per second. And we were like, how are we suddenly getting blocking that we've never had before on system DMVs involving like permissions stuff? So that was a nasty little surprise. You would also have similar surprises if you had any kind of deployment tool that concatenated different scripts together to execute them. So you should, yeah, I don't necessarily always do, but I should. Next up, MyTeaGotCold says 75% of my skills seem worthless after moving from being the boss of a single 1 terabyte server to the boss of many 10 to 20 terabyte servers. Is such a big loss normal? Yes. I'll tell you a story from the Microsoft Certified Master Program. When I went through that program, most of us who were in the program had been consultants or doing support for very large companies for years, but there was one person in there who'd only worked with one server for an extended period of time. That one person was very quickly totally underwater. They had no idea what they were doing because they'd just never been exposed to all the radically different stuff that's inside of SQL Server. So yeah, that's totally normal. I'd say to some extent, there's a change when you go from one server to many, period, regardless of the size. There are automation things that you should be doing, for example. Next up, Joseph says, restoring a large database from a native backup can take a long time. Would you recommend using log shipping to another server and switching over in case of failure instead of doing a full restore from backups? It all comes down to what your RPO and RTO are. RPO and RTO are how much data you're allowed to lose when the server goes down and how long you're allowed to be down for. To learn more about those, go to brentozar.com/go/RPO-RTO. It's completely free. I don't charge for that. That's just a totally free resource where I teach you what RPO and RTO are and how to design backup and recovery solutions so that you meet your business's goals. Craig says, I see that you use temp tables to pass sets of data from one stored procedure to another. What are your thoughts on serializing data as JSON and then passing that data back and forth as parameters? Well, you specifically said between stored procedures, and in that case, I don't like JSON at all. Why would you take tabular data and then burn CPU time to change it into text, then burn CPU again to reconvert it back into a table? That just doesn't make sense. In addition, SQL Server won't know how many rows are in that data and what their content is until long after it's rearranged that data from JSON into temp tables. So no, that just doesn't make sense. Now, somebody in there is going to say, well, I pass JSON into stored procedures for my application. That's totally different. Next up, Bob the developer says, I have a customer that claims his SQL server is slow. He doesn't want to pay for a bunch of my time to dig deep. CPU, memory, disk, and network aren't being hammered, but even simple queries are taking too long. Is locking the likely problem? Bob, if your customer doesn't want to pay you to figure out what the answer is, then the problem isn't that important to them. Don't guess, because you're probably going to be wrong. And when you're wrong, you're going to look like an idiot. So the same thing that I would tell my customers is, great, if you don't want to pay for my time to look into why something's a problem, that's cool. Come back to me if it ever is that bad of a problem, and let's go from there. Otherwise, if you want to pay somebody to bang around randomly on different buttons and knobs in SQL Server, I'm not your guy, because I don't want a reputation for that. Next up, DogsBarkingAngrily, I see what you did there, says, hi Brent, what is your learning process? How do you learn new things? I started watching your Postgres series, and I'm amazed at how you know so much. I never feel that way. So I'm curious as to where you learn from. So typically I learn by doing things. I find out what's the task that I need to do, and then I'll say, all right, now how do I go do that task? I'll go Google, I'll read different resources, I'll read source code for other people's stuff sometimes, I'll ask ChatGPT, all kinds of things like that. And then the one thing that I will emphasize is I run a lot of experiments. I'll make a hypothesis and I'll say, I think that this solves the problem because of this. So when I push here, this is going to happen. And then so that way I'll test what I just learned to see if I push here, does that actually happen? Does that number go down? Because I know a lot of people will just kind of wing it and click around and see what happens, and that's kind of dangerous. Next up, Dopinder asks, how do you like to troubleshoot connection timeout errors at the client? Oh, that's really easy. I have a blog post written up on it. If you search for Brent Ozar connection timeouts, I've got a blog with the exact checklist that I use, because I do run into that from time to time, and I don't want clients to have to pay me for it, because if it's not a SQL Server problem, why would I want to have them spend money on that? And then Craig asks, if you want to find out what stored procedures get called when someone does something on an application, what tools do you use? Profiler, extended events, or something else? I probably haven't done that in 10 years, because I'll just simply say to the developers, hey, when someone clicks this, what things happen? These days, I guess I have enough of authority where people will actually answer me and do that. But if I had to start doing that on a regular basis, I would use extended events. Eric Darling has SP Human Events. SP Human Events is a stored procedure that'll quickly set up an extended event session and tear it back down. And it has filtering parameters that you can use by login, by application, and more. Next up, Ayed says, hi Brent, thanks for providing your free content. You're welcome. Throughout your career, what is the max number of CPU cores and largest amount of memory you've ever encountered in an operational SQL VM? Around about like 128 to 192 CPU cores, in that range, and 2 to 4 terabytes of memory in that range. I don't remember exact specifics, but I've had a bunch of clients come in at that size. Yeah, so there's the answer to that. I know there are larger ones, I just haven't had to work with them, because typically with larger ones, they have a full-time dedicated team of DBAs, very good DBAs too at that particular size, generally speaking. Next up, Mary Puppins asks, what's your opinion of the new copilot support in Azure SQL DB for generating queries from English prompts? I haven't used it, but I have no problem with it. I think that it probably writes queries that are no worse than a new junior BI developer. And so I'm totally okay with that. I think that as the queries become higher value to the company, companies will put more work into those queries. They'll hire someone to either improve the queries or refine them, fix the errors, etc. But I'm fine with people running experiments in order to figure out the data that they need. I'm also totally fine with developers using tools like that as they start to build new applications. The faster that you can get across the finish line, the better. A lot of these queries, they're going to change over time anyway, as your style of application changes, as you add more things to a screen, as you add more tables. And so you'll go back naturally and just put more work into those over time. So I'm totally fine with that. Does it probably generate bad queries? Sure, but so do human beings. Human beings generate terrible queries. And then we'll take one more. SQL Linux asks, hey Brent, I recently enabled the setting optimized for ad hoc workloads to resolve an issue with many single-use plans. Do you disable this setting when you do consulting if you find it enabled? So I've never disabled that setting for a client. The way that I say it is it's kind of like saying, I believe I only write good T-SQL with my left hand. I'm like, okay, buddy, you just keep doing that if you believe that's working for you. SQL Linux, I would challenge you and say that that didn't actually fix the issue. All it did was reduce the amount of plans that got cached, but it didn't cut the CPU work involved with actually building those plans. Check out the setting forced parameterization, and it's probably time for you to enroll in one of my classes. Do I want to do any more? No, I'll probably start there. I'll stop there just because I'm also going to Kyoto and Tokyo on this trip, and I want to leave some questions in the queue that I can answer along the way there. So we made it through without raining too. So what are we doing today? Today in Osaka, we are taking a riverboat tour along this little river here, seeing some of the architecture in the city and the cool neon signs. I believe it's this city where I'm doing a go-kart thing, where I'm riding. I'm a passenger princess on this trip. Eve has planned out the entire trip. She's taking care of everything, which is rare for us. But so she set me up for like a go-kart racing thing where people wear Mario, Nintendo type costumes and play out Super Mario Kart in real life, driving around the streets of Osaka in go-karts. I had to get an international driving permit for this, so I'm kind of interested in this. This should be kind of fun. It's probably dangerous as hell. You're actually driving out on the streets. These are actual go-karts. I don't know how legal this is, but it should be a lot of fun. The city, I love it so far. It's really cute. It's really adorable. So I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.